Order. Questions to the Prime Minister. Mr. Graham Jones.
Question number 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will join me in condemning the senseless attack in a synagogue in West Jerusalem this week, where 5 people were killed. One of the victims was a dual Israeli UK citizen, Rabbi Avraham Goldberg, and we send our deepest condolences to his family and friends, as well as to the families of the other victims. This was an appalling act of terror, and we condemn all acts of this kind. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, and in addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mr. Graham Jones.
Mr. Speaker, I think the whole House would echo the comments of the Prime Minister regarding the incident in Israel. I think it's a tragedy that we're all deeply concerned about. Mr. Speaker, how confident is the Prime Minister that he won't have further defections to UKIP?
Well, what I would say to everyone in this House is there is only one way to secure an in-out referendum on Europe, and that is to back a Conservative victory at the next election.
Mr. Andrew Bridgen.
In 2007,
Order, order. Mr. Bridgen must be heard. Mr. Bridgen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2007, when Conservatives gained control of North West Leicester District Council, following 30 years of Labour maladministration, we inherited the worst quality council housing in the country. I'm pleased to announce that by the middle of next year, all the homes in North West Leicester will be up to the Decent Homes standard. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating the Conservative group, and will he agree with me it's another demonstration that Labour don't fix the roof when the sun's shining?
I certainly join my honourable friend in congratulating North West Leicestershire in the work they've done. It's absolutely vital that we bring poor quality housing up to standard, and the results they've had are good. But it's also important we get Britain building, and that is now well underway.
Mr. Ed Miliband.
Let's see if they're still cheering on Friday, Mr. Speaker. I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to Rabbi Avraham Goldberg, who was murdered in the horrific terrorist attack in Jerusalem, and the other victims. This was an appalling act, and all of my sympathies are with their families and friends. Mr. Speaker, can the Prime Minister tell us why he's so in favour of the bedroom tax, but so against the mansion tax?
Well, first of all, I make this prediction that the people behind me will still be cheering him on Friday. The point about when it comes to the views of close colleagues, it is worth listening what the new shadow cabinet member in charge of the election, the lady, honourable lady sitting next to the shadow chancellor, said about the leader. Said this: there's a wider concern in the public about whether he's got the leadership qualities to lead his own party, let alone the country. I knew we had moles in the Labour movement, I just didn't know they were that high up. The point about the spare room subsidy is it's a basic issue of fairness. You don't get that subsidy if you're in private sector rented accommodation, and so in our view you shouldn't get it in public sector rented accommodation. It's as simple as that.
Speaker, in case he's forgotten, 2 of the people behind him have jumped ship, and the others are waiting for the result to see if they should follow. Now, he tries to defend the bedroom tax. Let me just tell him, on the bedroom tax today, the government is going to court against a victim of domestic violence who has been raped, assaulted, harassed and stalked by her ex-partner, and is going to be charged the bedroom tax on her panic room. She's one of 280 victims of domestic violence in this category. Can he just remind us why that's the right thing to do?
This is why we have a discretionary housing payment system with money made available to council after council, and up to date, that money has been underspent.
Ed Miliband!
He doesn't know the facts. Many of these victims of domestic violence...
Order! The answers from the Prime Minister haven't always been fully heard, and they must be, and the questions from the Leader of the Opposition haven't always been fully heard, and they must be. I remind the House that that's what our voters, the electorate, would expect. Some decent behaviour, robust but courteous exchange. Mr. Ed Miliband.
Doesn't know the facts. Many of these victims of domestic violence are not getting the hardship payment, and protecting the victims of domestic violence should not be a matter of discretion, it is a matter of principle. Nothing better illustrates the contrast of values between this side of the House and that side of the House. Now let's talk about the mansion tax. Recently, a penthouse... Recently, a penthouse in Hyde Park sold for £140 million. Is he really saying that someone in that house should in that penthouse should pay the same amount of annual property tax as someone in a house worth a fraction of that value?
We have made sure that the richest in our country have made a contribution by putting up stamp duty. We put up stamp duty. We put up stamp duty on empty properties. We're charging foreigners property that come and invest in our country. But the point about this is what we need is a growing economy that's providing the jobs, the livelihoods for our people. That's what we're getting. Whereas what he's had in the last week is a pasting from a pop star.
Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what I expect from this Prime Minister. He only feels the pain of people struggling to find a £2 million garage. That is this Prime Minister. Now, I'll tell him why we need a mansion tax. Because the NHS is going backwards on his watch. Can he explain why this morning the NHS has missed its cancer waiting time targets for the third quarter in a row, meaning that 5,500 people waited more than 62 days for treatment?
Well, we're certainly not seeing a class act opposite, I have to say. And, I mean, this is... In the last week, Mr. Speaker, he's been called useless, hopeless, out of his depth, doesn't cut it, and an absolute disaster. And that's just what the front bench think. Now, he asks about cancer standards. The number of people treated for cancer is up 50% under this government. We put £12.7 billion extra into the NHS, money he thought was irresponsible, and of the 10 cancer standards, we're meeting 9 of them.
He's got absolutely no answer on the NHS. This is what cancer research. This is a target. This is a target that he pledged to meet. This is what Cancer Research UK. I know they don't want to listen to Cancer Research UK. This is what they say. This isn't just about missed targets. Thousands of patients are being failed. Now, he's missing his cancer targets. And they say about Wales, actually, they're doing a better job in Wales on cancer than here on that target. Now, he's missing his cancer targets, and he's missing his A&E targets. Let me put it to him in terms he might answer. On his visits to Rochester and Stroud, has he had time to explain to people why in the last 3 months, nearly 4,000 people waited more than 4 hours for A&E, and more than 700 people waited more than 4 hours on trolleys?
I'll tell you what is happening in the NHS. Nurses up by 2,500 under this government. The number of doctors up by 8,000 under this government. Millions more patients treated, all because we put in the extra money that they said was irresponsible. Now, he made the point about Wales. Let me just give him the facts. The last time A&E targets were met in Wales was March 2008. The last time the urgent cancer treatment was met in Wales was 2008. What is the difference between Wales and England? In England, the Tories are in charge, putting more money in, reforming our NHS, and in Wales, Labour in charge, cutting the NHS and missing targets.
The truth is, the NHS is going backwards on his watch, and the British people know it. And we're going to campaign on the NHS between now and the general election, because he has failed. He has failed on the NHS. We all know, Mr. Speaker, why this Prime Minister thinks the bedroom tax is great and the mansion tax to fund the NHS is terrible. If you've got big money, you've got a friend in this Prime Minister. If you haven't, he couldn't care less.
Well, I think, Mr. Speaker, it's fair to say his week hasn't got any better. This was the week when Mylene Klass wiped the floor with him in a television programme, and this was the week when there was an opinion poll in Scotland that showed that more people believe in the Loch Ness Monster than believe in his leadership. The only problem for the Labour Party is he does actually exist.
Mr. Tim Farron.
You're all very kind. Mr. Speaker, the impact of excessive second home ownership on rural communities is that it removes demand from GP surgeries, from village schools, rural bus services and post offices. And those services so very often close as a result. So will he agree to increase or to allow the increase in council tax on wealthy second homeowners to create a ring-fenced fund to support those vital rural services?
Well, we have allowed councils to charge more council tax on second homes, and many councils have taken that advantage. I think he's right to say that we do need to build more houses in order to make sure that the village school, the village post office, the village pub get the support that they need. And under this government, that's happening.
Stephen Hepburn.
The Jarrow NHS Walk-in Centre, which sees over 27,000 patients a year, is due to close. The management tell me it's because of cuts that they've got to make. Will the Prime Minister refute this? Will he intervene in this reckless management up in the North East who are cutting the NHS in his name and stop this stupid closure now?
Well, let me tell him what is actually happening in the NHS in South Tyneside. First of all, the clinical commissioning group funding is actually going up by 2%. At more than 225 million this year. On the specific issue, according to the figures, over 50,000 patients attended South Tyneside General Hospital A&E, and of those, 60% didn't require treatment, and that is why the new investment is going into the urgent care hub that is being proposed by the local managers and by the local clinicians in his constituency.
John Glenn. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Salisbury and South Wiltshire, unemployment has fallen by 60% since this government took office. Youth unemployment is down by 2/3, and across the county of Wiltshire, numbers in training and employment are set to exceed pre-recession levels. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we are on a clear path to improving living standards further for all, and the party opposite would put this into reverse?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. What we've seen in the last year is the biggest fall in unemployment since records began. We have more people in work in our country than ever before in our history. We've seen now the first rise in the minimum wage ahead of inflation since Labour's disastrous recession. And today we take further steps by banning exclusivity in 0 hours contracts. Our plan is working, and the British people are seeing the results. There are still warning signs out there about the global economy, but we need to stick to our plan and deliver wealth and prosperity for our people.
Mr. Speaker, across the United Kingdom, there are two governments redistributing wealth from the poorest to the richest. The Labour alternative is to have a 50p tax band and a mansion tax to give money to our vital public services, and also a banker's bonus tax to do a compulsory jobs guarantee for young people. Policies opposed by both the Tories and the shouting Scottish nationalists. Doesn't this tell you, Mr. Speaker, that in Scotland we face a clear choice in May? You go to bed with the SNP, you wake up with this man as Prime Minister.
I'm afraid he is simply wrong, because what's happening is that we see 500,000 more people in work in this year alone, and we see cuts in unemployment and fewer people claiming benefit in his own constituency. That is what is happening, and I know it's not convenient for the Labour narrative, but the fact is inequality is down, child poverty is down, the number of people in relative poverty is down. Those are the facts. They don't like them, but they can't hide from them.
Mr. Crispin Blunt. Mr. Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hadn't spotted the opportunity. The Prime Minister will know that the Same-Sex Marriage Act was built on the twin pillars of equality and support for marriage. Will he now put a rocket under the Ministry of Justice to make sure that under this administration we can deliver the same rights for those who want to celebrate their marriages as humanists?
Well, what we said at the time of the debate in the House of Lords is that there would be a consultation on this issue, and that's exactly what's happening.
Mr. Gareth Thomas.
Northwick Park Hospital, which serves my constituency, has seen an unprecedented increase in the numbers going to A&E, given the closure of Central Middlesex A&E department locally and the continuing weekday closure of Alexandra Avenue Polyclinic. Given that the hospital management believe that an extra 120 medical beds are necessary and local people want to see the clinic fully reopened, will the Prime Minister ask the Secretary of State for Health to address these concerns urgently?
Well, of course, I'll discuss it with the Secretary of State for Health, but I'll do this in the context of what he knows, which is in his own constituency, the A&E unit at Northwick Park is getting a £21 million upgrade and is due to open in December. That is because our long-term economic plan is working. We're putting money into the NHS, and this goes to a bigger truth. You can only have a strong NHS if you have a strong economy.
John Barron.
The Prime Minister has gone further than his predecessors in recognising our nuclear test veterans, but actions speak louder than words. Given how poorly they've been treated when compared with other countries, and the fact that 1 in 3 of their children have a serious medical condition, with 20% of conceptions ending prematurely, in the hope that this PMQ will be third time lucky, will the government make an ex gratia payment of £25 million into a charitable fund in order to help those veterans and descendants in need? After all, we only have to ask them once to do their duty and stand in front of a nuclear bomb.
Well, first of all, let me pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman who has been dogged in pursuit of this very important cause. There's a very important ruling out today that has serious implications, and it's right that we consider our response carefully. I've asked the Defence Secretary to meet with my honourable friend to discuss the implications for the nuclear test veteran community. I listened very carefully to what he says about an ex gratia fund, and let me just say this. This government has taken the time to deal with some of the difficult issues, such as war widows, which we effectively solved last week, such as the long-term injustice of there not being medals for Arctic convoy veterans and the class for the Bomber Command veterans as well. And I'm determined we deal with this issue. So I hope that he'll bear with me while we have some further discussions, but I do want us to try and seek a resolution to this issue.
Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, given the Prime Minister's observation that red lights are flashing on the dashboard of the world's economy, would he agree that in relation to Northern Ireland's economy, the 2 positive measures that he could take very soon would be, first of all, to devolve corporation tax powers to the Northern Ireland Assembly, and secondly, put pressure on energy companies to reduce the price of home heating oil as well as petrol and diesel because of the very high dependence in Northern Ireland on that type of energy? Would he take action on those 2 fronts immediately?
I think my right honourable gentleman makes important points. First of all, on off-grid heating oil and the costs, I think there is more that needs to be done to put pressure on companies, not just in Northern Ireland, but right across the United Kingdom. On the issue of corporation tax, I maintain the commitments that I have said before about what we will be saying and when we will be saying it. But I have to say to him, as we address this issue, we're also going to have to look very carefully at the Northern Ireland budget and making sure the Northern Ireland budget is working and the government of Northern Ireland is working, because that is a very important part of the overall picture.
Stephen Mosley.
This week I'm launching my latest Small Business Awards in Chester ahead of Small Business Saturday on Saturday the 6th of December. Will the Prime Minister join me in congratulating small businesses that have helped generate our economic recovery, and will he commit to shopping small and shopping local on Small Business Saturday?
I can certainly make that commitment, and that's what I'll be doing on Saturday. And I think Small Business Saturday is a really excellent initiative, and I would urge all honourable members to get behind it. In terms of helping small businesses, it is worth noting that we're cutting the jobs tax of businesses and charities by up to £2,000. We're abolishing national insurance contributions for under 21-year-olds. We're extending the doubling of small business rate relief, and we've cut corporation tax for small business. The small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy, and they know that that in this government they've got a true friend.
David Winnick.
Is he aware that the hateful bedroom tax will be remembered just like the Tory poll tax, which destroyed Margaret Thatcher's premiership? He should be ashamed for such a notorious tax came on his watch.
What the honourable gentleman and others on the Labour benches have to explain is why is it right that people in private rented accommodation who are claiming housing benefit don't get a spare room subsidy, but they think that people who are living in council housing should get a spare room subsidy? The second question they're going to have to answer is why did they oppose £83 billion of reductions in welfare that has helped us to maintain spending on health, maintain spending on schools, while taking 3 million of the poorest people out of tax altogether?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, 20-year-old Holly Gazzard was one of 2 girls murdered in my constituency by former partners. Her father, Mr. Nick Gazzard, has since set up the Holly Gazzard Trust, one of the objectives being to promote the teaching of personal, social, health and economic education in schools. It is mentioned in the new national curriculum, but the Trust feels that it needs to be compulsory for all schools and that it needs to be taught by external specialists. Will the Prime Minister help with this?
Well, I will look very carefully at what my honourable friend says. I mean, first of all, I'd like to send my deepest condolences, and those of the whole House, to Holly's family following her brutal murder. I also like to pay tribute to the Holly Gazzard Trust, set up by her family for its high-quality programme of classes aimed at educating young people about domestic abuse. What we have said is that sex relationships should always include relationship education as well, and that goes for all schools.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rents are sky high and house prices in Brighton rose 13% in the last quarter alone. Nurses' wages were recommended to go up by 1%, yet his government is blocking even this tiny rise. How does he expect hospitals like the Royal Sussex to be able to recruit enough nurses if they simply can't afford to live in the area?
Well, first of all, we are making a huge investment in the Royal Sussex Hospital, and that will have its effect. I have to say to the honourable lady, when she says that house prices are rising and are unaffordable, I have never come across a Green Party politician who's in favour of building houses anywhere for anyone.
David Mowat.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During his recent visit to Warrington, the Prime Minister will have seen at first hand our increasingly severe traffic issues. Can I thank him for ensuring that the local growth deal will deliver a new crossing near the town centre? But can I ask that what we really need is a new high-level crossing, something that's been planned but not delivered for nearly 30 years now? And will the government
So I will look very carefully at what my honourable friend says. I enjoyed my visit to his constituency, and he's right. I could see the problems of congestion, but I could also see how the long-term economic plan in his constituency is working in terms of jobs and growth. And he's right about the local growth deal, which for Warrington and Cheshire is a deal worth over £140 million in terms of government funding. And this does include support for the new swing bridge, which will help to tackle the congestion, as well as unlocking important building sites as well.
Reverend William McRae.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Northern Ireland welcome the success of the PSNI, assisted through the secret recordings made by the British intelligence services, in bringing 7 suspected terrorists, including terrorist godfathers, to court on charges of serious violent Republican activity. However, there is anger that whilst custom officials close an illicit fuel plant every 10 days in Northern Ireland, the profits bankroll Republican terrorists for years and cost the economy millions, yet not one person has been jailed in the last 12 years. Why are these terrorists and gangsters immune from prosecution? Does the Prime Minister agree this is an intolerable situation, and will he intervene to have the immediate full operation of the National Crime Agency in Northern Ireland?
Well, first of all, no one who commits crimes in Northern Ireland should be immune from prosecution, and I think he's right to pay tribute to the PSNI, who over the last few years have, I think, shown just what an extraordinarily capable police force they are, and we should remember how and the conditions in which they were built. The point he makes about the National Crime Agency, I think, is important. We would like to see the work of the National Crime Agency, which I think is proving itself in operation after operation, not just here in the United Kingdom, but right around the world. It's proving itself. It should be playing a part in Northern Ireland. That's a discussion we need to have with all the parties in Northern Ireland, and I hope over time we can get everyone to see the sense of having this important organisation there for Ulster.
Jeremy Lefroy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christians and others are being murdered for their faith in Nigeria, Syria, Iraq, Pakistan and many other countries. And elsewhere it's a crime to believe anything but what the state sanctions. Would my right honourable friend agree that our United Kingdom stands above all for freedom of speech, thought and belief, and that we must do all in our power to protect the persecuted and stand up to the persecutors, whoever they are?
I very much agree with my honourable friend, and he's right to make this such a cause that he pursues in this House and outside this House. Britain has a proud record of both political and religious tolerance and, of course, freedom of speech. And in our dealings with other countries, we should always make clear that we believe that is the right approach. There's an appalling amount of persecution of religious minorities around the world, and some now say that Christians are more persecuted than other religions in too many countries, and he names some of them. We should make sure at the heart of our foreign policy is this key issue of religious tolerance.
Sarah Champion.
Mr. Speaker, 2 Ofsted reports were released today showing local authorities aren't equipped to deal with child sexual exploitation. In addition, South Yorkshire police officers are being investigated for failing victims of abuse. I raised all of these issues in April. I've raised it with ministers. I've raised it in PMQs. What will it take for this government to help vulnerable people?
Well, first of all, let me commend the Honourable Lady for the work that she has done on this issue. I think it's very important that we learn the lessons of what happened in Rochdale and indeed what happened in the city of Oxford, near to my constituency, and elsewhere. I think the report today is important because the most important lesson it draws is you have to get every agency, whether it's the police or social services or schools, all working together. That is not happening in enough of our towns and cities, and it needs to. In terms of what this government is doing, the Home Office is leading this important effort, getting departments to work together, and I'm convinced we'll make good progress.
Michael Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the subject of immigration, Greencore, a very large sandwich making company in my constituency in Northampton North, already employing 1,100 people, is expanding massively thanks to this government's long-term economic plan. But there were reports last week that they were looking to hire staff from Hungary. Isn't it right that whereas Labour want untrammelled immigration, and that's what they gave this country for 13 years, the message for the people of Northampton and for Rochester for that matter is that it's thanks to this government that there are jobs in this country for people from Northampton, and we would be a bacon butty short of a sandwich platter if we forgot that.
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. I think the case of Greencore shows that what you need is not just proper immigration control, both within the EU and outside the EU, but you also need to see welfare reform so that it's not an option for people to live on welfare when they could work. And you also need to see, as we are doing, education reform so young people are leaving our schools and able to take on the jobs that are available. It also means sanctioning those people who are on unemployment benefit, who won't fill out a CV, who won't attend a job interview, who won't take a job when it's offered. A proper sanctions regime is actually part of a strong immigration policy.
David Crosby.
In December last year, the Prime Minister visited Bolton and promised that there would be 200 extra key morning commuter seats for the trains to Manchester by the end of the year. Last week, I met the train operator who said that they don't know how many seats there will be and they don't know when they will be available, but certainly not by the end of the year. Can he explain why his promise has been broken?
We are making huge investment into rail services in and around Greater Manchester, including in his own constituency. On the specific case that he raises, I will write to him with the details.
Henry Bellingham.
Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister aware that over the past year, unemployment in North West Norfolk has fallen by a very welcome 770? Does he agree with me that one should actually look behind the figures and statistics and see nearly 800 families that now have a new breadwinner and a brighter future? Is this not yet another vindication of the tough stances that he and his Chancellor had to take?
I think my honourable friend makes an important point. I mean, in North West Norfolk, the claimant count is down by 50% since the election, and the youth claimant count is coming down by 52% in the last year alone. And if you look at the figures released today, they show that people who've been in work for a year or more have actually seen their wages go up by 4%, more than twice the rate of inflation. Of course, that is their wages before the tax reductions that this government has made, because we've been a careful steward of the nation's finances. What we'd get with Labour is no growth, no jobs and higher taxes.
Right, effort. The Prime Minister apparently admits that his top-down reorganisation of the National Health Service and the Act that imposed it was a mistake. My bill on Friday is an opportunity for him to put right some of those mistakes and repeal the parts of it that impose privatisation on our National Health Service. It's backed by the British Medical Association, the Royal College of Nursing, the Royal College of Midwives, Unison, the Unite and the GMB, who represent the workers. Never have so many people been united against the government about a bill, an act that imposed so much on the National Health Service. Will he back my bill on Friday and tell people the National Health Service is not for sale, not now, not ever?
Well, at least we now know who's paying for his bill anyway. That is one thing. Let me make a couple of points to the honourable gentleman. Independent providers made up 5% of the NHS under Labour. They now make up just 6% of the NHS. The government that had the sweetheart deals with the independent sector was the party opposite, who handed them money in return for contracts. What we see in the NHS, 2,500 more nurses, 8,000 more doctors, more patients being treated, an NHS that is succeeding because we made the reforms and we put in the money.
Last but not least, Mr. Gordon Birchwhistle.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2009, Burnley was classed as an unemployment black spot. In 2014, unemployment has fallen to 3.5%. We are no longer a black spot. Could I advise my right honourable friend that the coalition government of the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats economic plan is working in Burnley?
First of all, can I thank him for what he says, but also commend his leadership on fighting for more apprenticeships, more skills, more training for young people in Burnley. It's succeeding. The long-term economic plan is succeeding in Burnley as it is in the rest of the country.
Order!